Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all, depending on the side of the world you find yourself in. If you're in the USA, good morning. If you are in Africa, it's most likely afternoon or evening. And I know a number of people are still logging on. And so let me just go ahead and spend the next few minutes laying out the basis for this conversation. Um, you're welcome to Cornell Alliance for Science live webinar session today, Monday, the 26th of April, 2021. It's on the theme, Seeds, Who Should Decide What the Farmer Grows? And we have both a global audience from the USA and other parts of the world that's gathered here to discuss this very global subject, but our panel is mainly Africa focused because we actually want to deal with the issue from the African perspective. So we have folks on the panel connecting from Uganda, from Kenya, from Nigeria, and myself, I'm a Ghanaian. My name is Joseph Opoku Gakpo. I'm an environment, agriculture, and rural development journalist based in Accra, Ghana. We'll veer into the details of the conversation in a while, but first, I want to tell you about Cornell Alliance for Science. The Cornell Alliance for Science is a global science communications initiative that's comprised of organizations and committed champions. And actually, AfS does seek to promote access to scientific innovation as a means of enhancing food security, improving environmental sustainability, and also raising the quality of life globally. You can read more about Cornell Alliance for Science when you log onto our website. That's allianceforscience.cornell.edu. And you can also follow Alliance for Science on Twitter at Science Ally. That's SCIENCEALLY. You can also follow us on Facebook at Science Ally, and then on Instagram as well, it's at Science Ally. And, you know, as the conversation unfolds, you can share your questions in the chats. They will be read to the panelists, and then getting to the end of the conversation, we'll get the various responses for you. Also, there are some of you who are watching this event live on Facebook. You can type your questions and comment in the comment section, and that would also be read out to the panel members. Now, AfS live sessions actually seek to put into context major scientific and agricultural issues, and then we bring in the people who have the in-depth understanding to actually speak to us all about it. And today's webinar is on the theme, Seeds, Who Should Decide What the Farmer Grows? And we're actually having this conversation because the 26th of April is celebrated every year by the organic movement and also a number of food sovereignty championing groups as International Seed Day. And it's actually also a day that originally the United Nations does mark it as World Intellectual Property Day. And the groups I mentioned earlier have adopted it for more than 10 years now to actually push for food sovereignty. And so this panel will discuss and explore what exactly the issues of food, seed sovereignty is all about. And then we'll discuss the situation with seeds on the continent, Africa specifically, and then discuss the advantages and also the disadvantages when it comes to the use of improved seeds. And so those are some of the issues that we'll be dealing with in the course of this particular conversation. I have a number of guests who are joining us over the next few minutes to discuss this topic. Patience Koku is a Nigerian farmer who farms more than 500 hectares of leased lands in the Kaduna state in Nigeria. She's the chief executive officer of Replenish Farms, which produces rice, soya, maize, vegetables, and seeds in Nigeria. She's actually a former fashion entrepreneur, and Patience subsequently took up farming in pursuit of a more meaningful occupation. And she's a global advocate for smallholder farmers, and she's a champion for the need for farmers to actually access better seeds. Patience, thank you very much for joining us today, and a very good afternoon to you in Nigeria.
Thank you for having me.
It's not only Patience who is on the conversation this afternoon. Clet Masiga is a conversation, he's actually a conservation biologist. He's also a geneticist from Uganda. He is director of the Bioscience Engineering and Farm Innovations at the Tropical Institute of Development Innovations. He also works as director for access and utilization of farm technologies and innovations at the Subanyo Farms. And he's a trained biodiversity conservationist. He's also trained in biotechnology. He's trained in plant breeding. He's trained in policy analysis and advocacy, and he's also done some training in project coordination as well as management and implementation. Clet is joining us from Uganda. Clet, good day to you, and thanks very much for joining us.
It's good day, evening, good afternoon here in Uganda, and greetings to all those who are tuned in to this webinar.
Thanks for making time to join us for this conversation, Clet. We have a third guest who is also joining us and will connect in a while. Leonida Odongo. Leonida Odongo is a social justice activist from Kenya. She runs the Haki Nawiri Afrika group, which is actually a youth-run initiative that's working towards a vision for a world where every person enjoys their rights to the fullest, irrespective of their social class. That organization runs a food justice initiative that, among others, promotes indigenous seeds through encouraging farmers to set up seed banks, and they're actively working on interrogation of food-related legislation policies as well, and they seek to promote healthy and safe focus on agroecological practices. So Leonida will be joining us in a while as we get the conversation going, but just to begin, I would want to begin with some thoughts from Patience Koku, who is joining us from Nigeria, specifically on the very fundamental topic that we're discussing. Who should decide the seeds that farmers grow on their fields? Should it be the consumers? Should it be the farmer himself? Should it be the seed industry? Should it be the philanthropic organizations that are helping support African agriculture? Should it probably be our donors and also our donor partners? Patience, I'll take your quick thoughts on that to commence the conversation.
Thank you, Joseph. I think this is an all-important topic because seed is the foundation of everything we do as farmers, and it's the beginning of what the end produce, of food is. I think that it's so first and foremost, because of the way that farming is right now and the fact that farmers are no longer reusing seed that they have saved, and so we purchase seeds from seed companies. I think it's a two-way. I would say my answer would be twofold, in the sense that the farmers ultimately have the choice, should have the final choice in what seeds they grow, based on the different options that are before them, which is seed companies providing farmers and access to the relevant, whatever seed, whether it's corn seed or so that farmers ultimately choose what they want to grow based on whether their current situation around them or, but the point is, because the seed is produced by a process, right? It's important for the farmers to be in constant dialogue with also the people who produce the seeds, to know exactly what the farmer needs are. And so when farmers ultimately have the choices, that farmers have, or ultimately have access, that farmers have then the right to choose what they grow based on their own personal circumstances and situation.
That's very interesting there. Obviously, that was expected. As a farmer yourself, you would obviously make the case that we should see a situation where farmers are deciding the kind of seeds that should actually be grown. But then let me take your thoughts on that as well, Clet. Who should be making those decisions on the kind of seeds that farmers grow?
Thank you. Thanks, Joseph and Patience. It's a two-way. And maybe before I get into that, I recently took my COVID jab, the first one, which many people seems to be not for. but I had to go for it. I did not ask AstraZeneca to make the COVID. They did it because they realized that the world needs it. Now, in a country like Uganda, where there was limited effort to make our own jab, someone out there was like, okay, we have a pandemic, there will be need for this solution, and they made it. Now, those of us who want the service went for it, and we have gotten it out of choice. We actually had to sign that I'm taking it willingly. But on the other hand, if I had the capacity, I would say, I want the vaccine. So I did not participate in asking for it, but I realized it is important and I need it. Now, scientists globally look for solutions that address a certain challenge. So a farmer or a peasant farmer in Uganda who is growing maize, which is referred to as corn in the US, all they need is to grow maize, which is available to them, and produce the maize that they need to consume or sell to make some income. However, a scientist could say, look, this farmer is growing maize, but there's this high-yielding variety that might be of value to this farmer. So without necessarily a farmer asking for it, a scientist, because a scientist doesn't just do science out of blue. You do science based on a certain problem that you are trying to address. So you develop a variety of maize that you believe is addressing a certain challenge of a farmer. Now, the person who invests in it, there are two. In our system, we have mainly the public systems that invest in two. But public systems have their own weaknesses. In countries where they have a strong private sector puts in their own money because you are working on a technology that has a market. So if I was to answer you very briefly, it is two ways. A farmer can make that choice, but the choice of the farmer is based on the exposure and the knowledge they have. If you are dealing with a farmer who doesn't listen to a radio, a farmer who doesn't listen to TV, doesn't watch TV, a farmer who doesn't read the newspaper, a farmer who doesn't have access to internet, what they will demand for is what they see their neighbor doing, or what tradition has been practiced by their ancestors. So that knowledge is passed over from that generation to the next generation. But if you're dealing with a farmer who knows that a certain company is producing a best variety, they will demand for it. If you're dealing with a farmer who can make a demand to a researcher and say, look, I am working on my maize, but you see my production is low because I don't know what's going on. Then the researchers will tell whether the problem is addressed by working on the soils, the problem is addressed by pesticides, the problem is addressed by increasing the genetic capacity of this seed to produce more. So that is how the kind of world that we live in. If you are working with a farmer like Patience, you can even order for seed from the United States if she does. But she can also order for seeds which are local. And the market also determines what a farmer goes for. For example, no farmer will grow something which is not demanded by the market. If they are not consuming it themselves, they know the market is going to buy. So a farmer makes a very critical judgment, depending on whether they want it themselves or they want it for their market. And therefore, to answer your question, it's either way, depending on the level of exposure and opportunities that are there. Thank you.
Thank you for those introductory remarks, Clet. But Patience, so today is being celebrated as World Seed Day by the seed sovereignty movement and the organic industry, because then they insist that there is a certain corporate capture of the seed industry that should actually not be the case. And one of the very strong arguments that they go ahead and make in pushing for seed sovereignty in Africa and elsewhere has to do with a complaint that today, when you look at the kind of industries that are running the seed sector globally, 4 different companies are responsible for the production and sale of about 60% of all the world's seeds. So these huge companies, they insist, have domineered the space, and the monopoly is not good, neither is it sustainable, they argue. Do you agree with some of those thoughts that are thrown out that then become the basis for a championing of seed sovereignty in Africa and elsewhere?
So I'm of the view that because the world is the way it is and nobody exists in a vacuum, there will be, of course, there will be spillover effects of conversations and thoughts. However, I think that Africa is in a very unique and distinct position because of the fact that we also have had a lot of public bred varieties. I think that majority of the seed that we grow in Africa are public bred varieties. And so the so-called 4 largest companies, so to speak, some of them have donated royalty-free germplasm that has been used to develop seeds and varieties for African smallholder farmers and African farmers in general. So I think that a lot of the time, a lot of things are said just for conversation's sake and just to push a point a bit too far. Because I think that in many sectors, whether in agriculture or other sectors as well, there will always be the biggest players, right? And there will always be small players. Now, in order to say that someone has an undue, I think it's important to understand how agriculture works for farmers right now, right? So a company produces seed, farmers go to companies to purchase seed. So in Nigeria, the 4 largest companies are not the biggest players in Nigeria. We have many local seed companies that are producing seed and farmers are buying year in, year out, who are not those major world players. Now, if the farmers don't get good quality seed, they cannot produce a good quality crop. They cannot have a good harvest. They cannot have the bumper harvest that we're talking about. So I think when we fall behind in terms of where the world is with food security and feeding the world, I think that our focus really should shift from some of these, what I would call unproductive conversations, where we are talking about things that are not so essential. Now, if we say farmers access to very good quality seeds subsidized, we're looking for ways to say, okay, if X person makes the $1 billion investment that is needed to bring science to bear, to say they produce certain seeds so that the farmers all over the world can have access to those seeds, I think that we can't now say, okay, that we would say that we need to have a movement that says seeds need to be done a particular way, because that's also still infringing on people's right to do business. So I think that what the focus is should be, how do we get farmers all over the world to have access to the same kind of quality seeds that enabled farmers in certain countries to produce 14 tons of corn per hectare, while other countries are still grappling with 1 ton per hectare. I think that the types of seeds that is available to farmers, those are the questions that I think, for me, are pertinent in helping us to fight to fight hunger and be able to say that we will make some progress. We find that a lot of conversations are going on now with the World Food Summit coming up, and us trying to find a way to change the way that we have done things in the past, where we have even failed. Because we can see that if, based on the SOFI report, that we are losing the war against hunger and there are more hungry people, it's important for us to now re-strategize and refocus the conversations to be able to get meaningful results.
So Leonida, who would be joining us in a while, who actually works with one of the activist organizations in Kenya, the Haki Nawiri Afrika organization actually makes a very interesting case for how come that they think a lot more caution has to be applied in terms of the dominance of the space by various improved seeds, and goes on to make the point that, locally developed seed varieties, as in what they call the farmer managed seeds, are often deemed as backward, but then goes on to make the point that these are the same seeds that have provided food that feeds the bulk of the global population and not the industrial food systems over the years. And then Leonida then goes on to make the point that the process of saving and exchanging indigenous seeds is sophisticated and good enough. And in that very interesting article that she wrote to actually mark World Seed Day, then she goes on to then criticize the role of various industries and the big firms in the seed industry, and goes on to say that they are the reasons why there's a lot of erosion of seeds and destruction to biodiversity over the years in Africa and elsewhere. Clet, you are a geneticist. These concerns that come up that the more reliance on improved seeds instead of the indigenous seeds and the land races is affecting biodiversity and probably threatening the very existence of African agriculture. What do you say to some of these arguments?
Thank you. I lost my network for some time. The whole issue is that I think people have just got to get some facts first. What is biodiversity and why are we losing biodiversity? We are losing biodiversity because of several other challenges. It's not about only adoption of a certain variety or some species. The first gene bank in the world was, if I remember very quite well, is in 1800s. That's when we had the first gene banks. Why were they established is after recognizing that we are continuing to lose some biodiversity. That time, people are not even thinking about modern varieties. In fact, it is published or documented information that we are losing biodiversity at a rate of between 15 to 25% every year. That is using the indicator species. The indicator species are the common species that you see in a given ecosystem. If you have a certain type of fish in a lake or a water body, you can use that as an indicator of the abundance of fish in that. So you select and measure it at a given time. In a forested area, there are indicator species in that forest. When they disappear, it sends a signal that something is going on which is not correct. And there are also some species that you see, which when you see them emerge like invasive species, then you know there is a danger, because as they come in, they're displacing some of the biodiversity that does exist there. And we are seeing this in every given ecosystem. We have the farming systems, which people are talking about, but we have the natural systems like the savanna grasslands. We have rapid fires that keep setting on. Some of them are man-made, some of them not. Those of you who are in the United States, you know the fires that every year are causing havoc in some parts of California. Greece, every year we hear of fires. Now, supposing those fires are coming at a time when the seed or the plants have not seeded, it means the fires are destroying the mother plant. And if by any chance there's no seed, then the fires are reducing the seeds that are naturally available in that ecosystem. Now, some of these fires are man-made, others are not. So the solutions to conserve or address some of these problems started long ago, like gene banks. Now, there are some plants that can comfortably be stored in a gene bank, and there are those that can only be conserved in a live gene bank, like those that do not have the seeds. You talk of things like bananas, for example. You talk of some plants, some trees, because sometimes in our systems, you are unable or we are unable to actually keep the seed in a very stable, cold environment that reduces the functioning of that seed so that the seed can stay for a very long time. And we're talking of very old gene banks that started like one of the Kiwi botanical gardens. Now, the reason they were established is after realization that naturally we are losing some biodiversity, but also as human population grows, you cannot continue to use the seed that was available in the wild. For example, if you have the wild maize, the wild maize had like 3-5 seeds in the whole cob. Now, as humans' population expanded, you begin to realize that how are we going to sustain life using what was given in nature? That said, we also have crops that are still perform very well from the wild, like the African yams.
Okay.
Some species of the African rice. Some species of coffee that originated in the African continent. They're there. But there are situations where the productivity is so low that the only thing that can address that is through improving that seed. So improving the seed is not in any way reducing the biodiversity. Because also what is going on, by having improved seed, it means this farmer can produce so much on a very small acre. But this same farmer can produce the same quantity using an expansive part of land. So it means the farmer must go to the forest, destroy more forest to get what they could have gotten from 1 acre. Instead, they go and destroy 50 acres.
Very well.
Now, scientists globally have learned to solve human problems by looking at some of these challenges. Is there a way I can produce 10 tons of maize from 1 hectare rather than growing? Because in Uganda, for example, the average farm produces 1,000 kilograms of maize from 1 acre. With improved seed, you can go to 4,000 kilograms from 1 acre of maize.
Okay.
So the other farmer will have to clear or use 10 acres of land using what they call now a local variety. And the other farmer goes and produces the same on 1 acre of land. But by the way, for your information, what farmers in Uganda call local varieties of maize is not local. For example, there's a variety of maize that is called the Nalongo. Nalongo is a mother of twins. This variety was originally bred in Mexico, then introduced to Africa first in Ghana. Perhaps you know they call it a protein maize. And it was bred by a CIMIT scientist from India. Then moved to Africa, first entered Africa through Ghana, and the second place that entered was Uganda. Then it spread to several other African countries. Now farmers call that one local maize variety. And I asked them, what local? First of all, the maize itself was not indigenous to Africa. It was indigenous to Mexico.
Okay.
It was just moved by explorers.
Yes.
They moved it. But you see, every generation that comes and finds there something, they start to think, this is what we found there. No. Beans, for example. Beans were never indigenous to Africa.
Sure. Clet, let me bring Leonida into the conversation. Thanks very much for joining us. We've gotten the conversation underway already. I'll go ahead and take your own initial thoughts. You're part of the team that's celebrating today as International Seed Day, as a day to push for seed sovereignty and encourage, for that matter, discourage industrial seeds and the use of very improved varieties and all. Why do you think that argument has become necessary, and you demanding a return to seed sovereignty with how we do production generally in Africa? Leonida.
Thank you so much, Joseph, for this opportunity and for giving me this platform. One, I'd like to say that when you look at indigenous seeds in the African continent, one, these seeds are not just, these seeds have meaning. In the African context, seed is cultural, seed is looked as the future, seed is equated to life. Even for example, the planting process, it's cultural. When you go to, during planting season, it's not everybody that goes to plant the seeds. Sometimes you find that the first seed must be planted, let's say, by an elderly person to symbolize continuity of life. So when we talk about seeds in Africa, we are talking about a very important component. One thing I want to say is that if you ask, let's say, for example, an 80-year-old African grandmother or grandfather, and you ask them about farming systems in the past, they'll tell you that we never used to spray our farm produce. We never used to use any chemicals, and we were using seeds that we had inherited from our grandmothers and grandfathers. And the granaries existed as places for keeping seeds. But what is now happening with the industrial food production system is that, one, they're demonizing the indigenous seeds, calling them backward, calling them non-productive. But you need to know that research has shown that 70 to 80% of the food that is consumed in the African continent comes from the indigenous varieties of food. What is happening? The problem comes in, and this is what is bringing in the food insecurity aspect, is that there are very many losses, at harvest time. Post-harvest losses are very many. And what scientists ought to do, instead of concentrating, for instance, on seeds, they should actually be providing farmers with alternatives on how to preserve their crops. Another thing I want to point out is that if you look at food production right now, you find that at every level, the farmer must use some element of chemicals. At planting time, there are very many GM trials taking place, even in my country, Kenya. Like now, there are trials for cassava, there are trials for cotton. And we are being told that the aim of using GM is to revive the cotton industry. While in real sense, the reason why we're having problems in the cotton industry is that opening up of markets and dumping of finished clothes. In Kenya, we call them mitumba. And where do these finished second-hand clothes come from? They are dumped into Africa from Europe. So when you talk about seeds and industrial seeds that are produced in an industrial way, what happens is that they chain farmers to the agrovet. At every level, when you're planting, when the seeds are growing, weeding point, you have to use chemicals. At storage time, you have to use chemicals. The question is, how much money do farmers have that they'll be using chemicals at every level? It's expensive for them.
But
another thing is,
but Leonida, for example, with the GM seeds, as you speak of in Kenya, with the BT cotton, and the concerns you are drawing attention with the continuous spraying of pesticides and all, isn't that why the improved seeds are necessary? Because then we understand that from trials, the BT varieties actually use far less pesticides than the land races that have been used all these years. Farmers have to spray their cotton fields about 8 to 12 times every year. But with these improved GM varieties, then they are spraying just about 3 times. Isn't that reason enough to rather want to adopt these GM varieties than to rely on the land races?
What I can say is that I'll always be in support of indigenous varieties. One, you look at the cost aspect. When the farmer uses indigenous varieties, they don't have to buy any seeds. They already have the seed banks within their localities. And another thing that is dangerous when you talk about the industrial seed system is that they're even influencing legislations, for instance. Like right now, there is the push for harmonization of legislations relating to seeds. And what this is going to do to smallholder farmers is that they're going to criminalize age-old traditions of exchanging seeds. And if you look at, for example, various legislations, you'll find that there are punitive clauses in these legislations that criminalize what farmers are doing. So what I can say is that farmers should be allowed to produce their own seeds, because in actual sense, they are the ones, the smallholder farmers are the ones who are feeding not only Africa, but they're the ones who are feeding the world. And if you plant indigenous varieties,
Clet,
Clet,
can you mute for us? You need that round up for me. Clet, kindly mute so we can hear Leonida more clearly. Yes, need a round up for me. Let's move on to Patience.
Okay.
That's working? That's working? Yes.
So
can I proceed?
Yes, go ahead and round up quickly for me, Leonida.
Okay, what I was saying is that with indigenous seeds, if you look at the industrial seed systems, what happens is that at every level, the farmer must use chemicals. That is one thing. Number two, when you look at planting, when your soil is healthy, it means your food is also going to be healthy. What industrial seed system is doing to us, to the soil, it means is that farmers are being forced to use chemicals, and this is making them lose nutrients in the soil. So it means that when they grow food, the food is not going to do well. And that is what happened. That is part of the reason why we have problems with food production. Why? Because the soil has become denatured because of overuse of chemicals.
Very well. Leonida, thanks very much for those perspectives. So Patience, you're a farmer yourself. This argument that you are better off using indigenous seeds because the improved ones are more expensive to want to invest in, is that the situation you face in your job as a farmer?
Okay, so I want to first refer to something that Clet said and then come back to answer the question. So he said something very important. What are indigenous seeds really? Because corn is a staple in Nigeria, South Africa, many parts of Africa. It's something that we eat every day, and it came from Mexico. Rice is not from here. So when we talk about indigenous seeds, I'm really just, kind of scratching my head to say, okay, which indigenous staple is what is feeding our people bottom line? Then I would like to say that, truly I pray for an Africa where we can research and understand our situation before we buy into an argument that has absolutely no reality with us here, and we begin to push it. Now, we are talking about industrial seeds and indigenous seeds. I mean, I'm even like, I'm at a loss because I'm wondering, industrial seeds, I mean, what is that really? Because if we are even talking about, Leonida spoke about cotton. I recently grew the GM cotton that was released in Nigeria on my farm. And Nigeria has over 200 million people. We wear everything, and we are one of the most fashionable people in the world. I'm sure you will agree, Joseph, that you see our bright colors in what we wear and in the prints. All of it is on cotton that is imported into Nigeria. Now, we buy a base cotton and we do a tie-dye on it, localized in quote. Now, what is the reason for this? There is a bollworm that has destroyed our entire cotton production in the past. And most of the traditional cotton growers who have done it for decades, if there was such a thing as saving seeds, I am sure they would have saved those seeds and continued, but they were not, their farms and their seeds were overrun by a bollworm that they could not sustain the farming any longer, and they all, mostly it fizzled out and people were no longer growing cotton because it wasn't profitable. Now, as a result of that, I mean, if a farmer is spraying a farm 10, 15, even 20 times in a year, how much money is that and how much degradation is that of a so-called indigenous cotton crop? As opposed to now, this BT cotton that I grew on my farm, and we sprayed probably about twice, and it yielded, it had multiple balls. So we are even excited about a possible cotton revolution where our industries that provided jobs to thousands of people can be revamped. So we are now looking at situations where we can begin to look at complete turnaround of not only industry, but also our own existing food systems. In Nigeria, I don't know about other countries, we import corn from South America, from the US. We import cotton, soybean meal, which we use to either produce oil or we use for our chicken feeds and so on. We are importing GM crop. We are not growing soya beans that can produce more than 1 ton per hectare. Because the soya bean seeds have, of course, the different constraints that we have, the weeds, that we have pests, we have all sorts of things, and we are not able to feed ourselves. I think that in order for us to seriously look at our problem, because Europe and South America and the US, they have food surpluses, we are buying their surplus. If we continue to have these conversations where we are talking about biodiversity, Clet was very clear to us to say there are many, many things that are wrong with our environment as it is. Global warming, there's so much that's going on that's causing degradation. And we are focusing on saying that seeds are a problem or that farmers are doing something that is eroding the environment. What we're saying is that if there are certain scientific solutions to problems, science quickly brought us COVID vaccines. We have all gone and taken our shots, and we are moving on from it and getting better. Why are we not opening our hearts to say, look, what is available? When we demonize, and when somebody says that they are demonizing indigenous seeds, I have never heard any advert or any conversation by any seed company that says, don't buy indigenous seeds. I strongly believe that there are some people sitting somewhere who manufacture these conversations for their own personal good, and they put it out there in the public space, and these conversations begin to hold for their own personal interest. If you have an interest for Africa where people are dying of hunger every day, you will be looking for what is the best solution. You will be looking for what is healthy, what is right. I have gone and done all kinds of research on GM. Bring me the scientific evidence that says GM crop is hazardous, is not safe. There is absolutely none. We are buying a narrative that somebody for their own personal gain is putting out there. And I'm shocked that Africa will be bringing such a resistance to so much help, because people are saying, look, let us take germplasm that has been productive. Africa cannot afford, a lot of African farmers cannot afford to buy GM seed at the prices that they are sold to farmers in the US and other places. And they say, look, give it to African scientists. Let them work on it and let those improved varieties of seeds be available to farmers. And that's what has happened. Nigerian scientists have worked on a lot of these varieties that we are now putting in the market. So who is the, in quotes, demonizer? Is it the Nigerian scientists or in the research institutions? Who is the person, or is it the person who gave you royalty-free germplasm that you should pay millions of dollars for? I think that it's time for us to wake up from our slumber. We have a problem. Africa has fallen behind. The world has left us behind. Hunger is brazenly facing us. Because people are hungry, they are radicalized very easily. We have problems with security all over the place. We cannot go to the farms. We have to face the problems that we have so that we can come up with the right solution.
Many thanks for those interesting perspectives. Clet, I'll come to you in a jiffy, but just to bounce this off Leonida as well. So Patience make the point that she's convinced the improved seeds will make huge difference in the lives of herself and other farmers. She points to how she's reduced the use of chemicals on her fields as a result of planting improved seeds, and specifically GM seeds in Nigeria. There is vast evidence that even away from GM seeds, when it comes to improved seeds generally, what has been described as the Green Revolution created a situation where various nations like Mexico, India, Pakistan, according to data from the FAO, kind of double their yield between the 1960s and the 1970s, mainly as a result of the use of improved seeds. You know, and there are huge successes to point to how some of these improved varieties are helping deal with issues of food insecurity. And there is data that more than $18 billion was the amount that farmers who grew GM crops earned extra across both the developing and the developing world over the last year that just ended. If the commitment is to improving the lot of farmers and helping them deal with issues of food insecurity and helping them earn more from their fields and deal with poverty, shouldn't that rather be where the focus should be, rather than an idea that says seeds are about cultural initiatives, and so then locally produced, non-improved seed should rather be the focus? Leonida.
Thank you for what you've said. I'll be responding to some of the issues you've raised. You spoke about the 1970s and 1960s and 70s having thriving food systems and a lot of food produced thanks to the Green Revolution. But how comes that you've not been able to point out the suicides that were happening in India, where farmers were, you know, with Green Revolution, it was intensified use of chemicals, using improved seeds, and farmers had to, you know, these were being given to them in forms of sort of loans, not grants. There are cases of suicides. And it's just that after some time, when farmers used during the Green Revolution period, the yields grew, but for just a period. Yes, because if these seeds actually work, why do we continue to have global hunger? Yes. What is happening is that with these industrially produced seeds, what happens is that they thrive on monoculture system of food production. And with a monoculture system of production, what happens is that nutrients continue to get lost. And with the loss of nutrients, as I said before, the most important, the first element when you're producing food is the soil. If your soil is sick, it means that even the food is not going to be healthy. So this is why we are pushing for the farmers to use systems, agroecology being one of them, regenerative agriculture being the next one, that actually helps to heal the soil and helps to bring back biodiversity. There are places, for instance, because of toxicity, bees are dying, butterflies are dying because of chemicals. And when bees and butterflies die, who's going to do pollination for us? And we can't pollinate using our hands. So when we are talking about industrial food systems, what I can say is that we need to look at for how long for how long will we have these yields? Are we having it just for a short time, and then our soil continues to get denatured? Thank you.
Thank you, Leonida. Clet, that's actually the case, that these improved varieties end up harming the environment for the worse and result in what? Farmers then committing suicide and nutrients in the varieties that get produced eventually being lost?
Thank you, Joseph, and my friend Leonida. I have a very interesting background. You see, when I studied conservation biology, it exposed me to realities on biodiversity loss. It did expose me to realities of biodiversity loss. Interestingly, in Uganda here, I'm leading a series of projects. One of them is bee. So we are piloting a number of innovations in beekeeping. So we go to the wild and we also do it on farms. And we are evaluating different production systems, the wild trees, what's happening in the caves and other things. Now,
Clet's connection just froze there. Hopefully it will get better so that then he goes ahead to make his points for us to quickly round up on the conversation. Clet, can you hear me? Okay. Clet's connection just froze there. He'll join us back and then okay, Clet's connection just froze there. He'll join us back in a while. Clet, we can hear you now.
I seem to be back, yeah.
Yeah.
So we have savanna ecosystems, which is natural. Even in deserts, there are spots where you find some wild foods there. In a tropical rainforest, there's some foods there. Fruits, for example. I was showing this book, Edible Wild Plants. Nearly every country has documented sites, including Uganda. So if you are talking of going to the wild and collect some fruits and eat, yes, they are there. But studies have shown that if we left improved seed and we go to organic world or rely on the wild crops, we will have to make a decision to kill 4 billion people off the world such that the remaining 3 billion can be sustained on the wild environment or traditional foods, because they are there. But at the same time, people are wondering, including the medicines, because there are some medicines traditionally that are harvested where you cut the tree back. Now, when you remove the tree back, the tree is unable to take the nutrients from the roots. So it dies. And therefore, we miss that tree which was providing us with medicine. Now, what we are doing in the modern world is how can we emulate what is in the wild to be able to improve that such that it's produced on a sustainable scale. Now, when we say that soils, there is how much the soils can contribute. The soils will not give you more yield than the genetic capacity, maximum production potential of a given variety. They are simply helping a farmer to get the best out of that given variety. So if this particular crop, its maximum production is 10 tons, actually its maximum production is 1 ton per acre. However much you feed the soil, you still get what? 1 ton. But if you improve it
Yeah.
that production or genetic capacity will go high. I have heard that Indian farmers committed suicide. Indian farmers committed suicide because they were taking loans and they were unable to pay the loans because of other factors. There's nowhere where it is documented that the farmers were not able to get the yields that they required. We are talking of patents. I'm here using a computer. Is there anyone who has failed to use a computer because it is actually a product of patents? Patents does not affect someone who choose not to use it. I'm paying data to use this computer because I know the benefits of using data. Otherwise, I could have traveled to USA. What is the cost compared to the cost of using the data? Here, I'm spending less than $1 to buy the data to be online and communicate with you. But look at the traditional system where I had to board the plane to travel there and speak to you for 1 hour. We have had this thing, you know, there is agroecological intensification system where you combine both the organic system and the modern fertilizers to get the maximum product from a given situation. And we mainly talk of integrated systems because there are situations where fertilizers, for example, will not enhance the facility of the soil because, for example, there could be runoff, erosion. So even if you put there a lot of fertilizer, it will be useless. So what you work on in that case, you first work on the soil structure. And then you put the other nutrients that may not be there. Africa, for example, talks of the largest deposits of phosphate fertilizers. They're in the wild. But we need to extract them from where they are using science to be able to make it available to the farmers. We are talking of that demonizing the local seeds. Nobody has come up anywhere in the world to say traditional indigenous seeds are bad. But those seeds are addressing a specific need. We have a variety of bananas in Uganda, which is eaten as a dessert. On a banana, it puts on very small clusters, but it's quite sweet. So even if you pump that soil with lots of nutrients, you will still not get more than 5 kilograms from that batch. And it can be eaten by Clet alone and efficient. But because of demand to supply and feed more people, you go for improved varieties. Interestingly, bananas, which we call as local foods or local plants in Uganda, are not local.
Well,
They came from Honduras. Now, what people are saying is local is not local. It is simply due to lack of information. Chemicals. There is hardly anything that you can produce in an agricultural system that we live in currently, especially in Africa, without using a lot of pesticides. The pests. Now, actually, the leading causes of problems that we are consuming now is because of people rejecting modern technologies to produce pest-free or crops that inherently are resistant to pests. Now, people must put a lot of chemicals in the food stores to be able to preserve that food to be eaten for a long time. Uganda recently had a ban on exporting coffee to Kenya because of aflatoxins. But BT maize are not affected by aflatoxins. So we would save a lot, both to a farmer and then we're talking of, you know, that the smallholder or traditional farmers are feeding the world. You are talking of 90% of the population feeding 2%. What economic sense does that make?
well,
You are essentially locking 90% of the people in poverty because they must produce to feed the 10%. But if we reduce the population of farmers in farming, that will not be the case. And that's what is happening in most of the countries that have transformed. America, how many farmers are in farming? Or how many, the population of people in farming? Less than 6%, I think. Europeans, on average, less than 30% in farming. Africa, more than 90%. Does it sound anything unusual to now hear that most Africans are poor?
Very well.
In India, I've visited some populations where every year they must get donations of food twice or in 2 seasons because what they produce is not enough to even feed themselves.
Very well.
And then our friends, the Leonidas, who are actually earning a livelihood outside farming, want to confuse farmers to stay in poverty, and they can't even afford to feed themselves. They can't sell any excess to take their children to school. So people are locked up in poverty in the name of preserving traditional food. All of us would go for traditional food if it is there. That's not there. And if you go where they are, it is extremely expensive. I lived in Europe. I would go for chicken which is not organic because I could afford that. And I ate and I looked good. But there are those who say, okay, I'm looking for these specific ones. So we should be talking in terms of our food habit. If you go to a restaurant and eat a full chicken, 3 kilograms of chicken, is the problem chicken or the problem is your appetite? You have too much appetite, eating 1 kilogram, eating 3 kilograms of chicken. Then the next day you say the chicken is bad. Why can't you just eat a few grams of that chicken and you're okay? So the point we are making is that we are mixing up things. Those of us who promote science are not necessarily against traditional systems. For example, I also do practice as a banana farmer. There are a few occasions where I will get artificial fertilizers and add in the garden. Most of that I also have cows. So I get the manure and put there. But there are situations where people can't afford the organic fertilizers. Now, our friends who are against science think that some of us are not there. I don't know if you can read this. The bioeco approach to sustainable soil systems. In this kind of documentations or books that we read, we are trying to enlighten ourselves and see which components can help to enhance soil fertility given special circumstances. There's no soil, for example. Our friends are trying to tell us that farming is the only business where you remove capital and they don't put back. Which business in this world thrives on removing and they don't put back? When you harvest crops, you are removing nutrients. You must put back the nutrients. You are disorganizing the soil structure. You must still, actually, the traditional farming systems are the ones responsible for the disappearance of this. Because you go to the wild, the wild where people raise cows in the wild environments. What people do is during every dry season, they set fire. Those are traditions. Set fire to enhance growth of fresh grass.
Very well.
For cows. Now, by burning, you're actually killing every biodiversity which is there, bees inclusive.
Very well.
They are spraying against the fall armyworm, which hit Africa recently. When you are spraying using non-selective pesticides, are bees going to be safe? But if you had BT maize, the BT maize will resist the fall armyworm, and therefore it will kill only the fall armyworm, and the bees will be safe. But a lot of misinformation goes around and says you are killing bees. How are you killing bees when you're only killing the fall arm and the bees are left there intact? So actually, the people doing much disaster to our environment are against science. Science doesn't come to destroy. Science comes to store, to restore and sustain livelihoods. There are documented evidence, studies which show that when people were poor, they actually lived at an average lifespan of 30 years. But now people are living longer. Go to Japan, 80 years. US, I think 70-something years. Africa, where we are practicing traditional farming and people don't have money, they don't have food, they don't have enough of anything. The average lifespan is less than 50 years. Is it by coincidence? People have just got to get right to information. No one goes to school to destroy. We go to school, or private investors invest in areas where they know there's returns, but you're also providing a service. We have priests, pastors. You go to church, you don't just go, you go with an offertory, because these guys have offered to teach you spiritually, to know that there's God. And because you're getting this knowledge from this person, as a return, you give something because this person's livelihood. relies on printing and delivering this right information for you. The role of a scientist or a soil scientist is to work on elements that improve the soils to sustain livelihood. Now you cannot convert a soil scientist to a geneticist. The role of a geneticist is to understand genes, how they're interacting and something else. So you cannot convert a geneticist to start working on soil. That's where they go wrong. Different people, different professions offer different things. You cannot get a person working at a bioscience or a geneticist to start producing pesticides or handle post-food harvest losses. That's a job of a food scientist whose business is to ensure that they protect or process what is available. Now some people are again saying processed foods are bad. But science keeps advancing. From one step, you go to another. So if processing is removing something, the next level of processing should be to conserve what is being removed.
Very well, very well. Clet, that's a lot you've given us to chew on. I'll take those as your final words. We've gone past the hour mark already. I'll go ahead and take final words from Leonida as well. And then I'll move on to Patience, even as we bring the conversation to a close, even as we mark today as World Intellectual Property Day and equally mark it as World Seed Day. Leonida, final thoughts? Okay, looks like we don't have Leonida right there. The connection is a little unstable there.
Is there?
Patience, Leonida, can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
I can. Yes,
okay.
I can hear you.
Final words, then I'll move on to Patience as we round up on the conversation.
What I want to say is that we are not, when we promote indigenous seeds and smallholder farmers, we're not against science, but we are for a system that works for farmers, not a system that continues to deprive farmers, for example, of their indigenous seeds. Because, like, for example, when scientists are coming up with new seeds, what happens is sometimes they get the materials, the genetic material from what the indigenous sources. And issues, for example, things that are done, for example, gene editing, those are some of the things that we have that are problematic, for instance. What I want to say is that when we look at food, the best food is natural food. We have to be concerned about not only our current generation, but also the future. And with systems, for example, agroecology, we retain biodiversity. If you look at FAO, you see that biodiversity is disappearing. Even if you look at seed species, they are disappearing. And part of the disappearance is because of monoculture system. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonida. Patience, I'll give you the final word.
Yes, thank you, Joseph. Okay, so I think that as a final word, I would like to say that we, in Africa, I think we are at a point where we need to work together. And so what I would say to Leonida and a lot of groups that come up with information that basically hasn't been thought out or hasn't been researched, I would say, let us, as much as we all want to have our personal whatever's addressed, I would say that let us look at the big picture, because if we continue to have these conversations and push these agendas, I'm happy that it's Intellectual Property Day, because if Africa begins to honor intellectual property agreements, we will be able to access more science. Nobody will go and invest in something and just throw it to, like, on the floor for someone to pick up. We have a lot of seeds that we cannot bring in, that companies cannot bring into, say, Nigeria, because we haven't signed some UPOV agreements and so on. I think that we should focus on really things that will move us forward as a continent. As we go into dialogues that are being had before the World Food System Summit, where we are hoping that we can actually get some really game-changing solutions that will work for Africa to bridge the gap. Africa is left behind. We are far behind. We are struggling And the truth is that if we are not able to look at the big picture, if we continue to look at like what we sometimes say in Nigeria, stomach infrastructure, where someone is looking at their own personal interest as against the interest of the entire continent, we will never move forward. We have scientists, we have conservation scientists. Clet has said so much that makes so much sense when you talk about biodiversity and what the problems are and so on. We are talking about promoting zero tillage. Africans have done no-till for centuries. Many places in Africa, they just strike the ground and plant, and it grows. But we have not been able to develop these technologies that will help us to improve our farming systems. She's talking about the soil. If we do not till our soil, if we don't use equipment and so on, we build the soil strata. Where there are so many things we can do to improve our soils. We are talking about technology that will help us to spray less. Farmers' health is a huge issue. We don't test farmers in Africa to see who has lung disease based on how much exposure he has had to spraying all sorts of things, because he has to do it so many times. Science can help us reduce that. So I think that we should now come together as a continent and say, where is the farmer's voice? Where is the scientist's voice? And where is even the civil society voice that is educated and that is knowledgeable? We need at this point to bring knowledge to bear. We are very intelligent people here in Africa. We can research, we can go and look at what is science doing, what are the scientists doing, understand it, and then we don't come and propose something that someone gives us in a pamphlet and says, look, this is what we're pushing, and then they put us in Africa in front to further enslave ourselves. Neocolonialism is where someone wants me to stay down and buy a surplus from an excess that is produced from someone else when I can also have that surplus. Fair trade is where Africa comes to a place where we will sell, we will buy, but we would have a good balance. We will not be always left behind. So please, as Africa, feeding ourselves is so pertinent. There is every tool in the box is important, and we must embrace what is available to us as science. The way we took our COVID shots, that is the way we should look to say, what has science got on the table for farmers, and how can we use it to improve our food system?
Many thanks, Patience Koku there. You couldn't have rounded it all up on such a high note, making the point that there's probably a middle ground somewhere beyond the extreme positioning that says indigenous crops, or for that matter, land races or improved seeds or even biotech seeds and all. There's probably that middle ground, and that the focus should be on which will work best within specific contexts, and Africa probably picking the lessons from elsewhere, but then modifying it to meet our taste and our own prospects and our own expectations on the continent. So we'll bring the conversation to a close. I've had a very interesting panel discussing who should decide what farmers grow. We've veered a bit into the conversation around whether the focus should be on improved seeds or indigenous seeds. And we've had people like Clet Masiga making the argument that there is probably nothing like indigenous seed on this side of the Atlantic Ocean, because even the corn that we consume is something that originated originally from the Mexican area. But many thanks for joining us. Clet Masiga is in Uganda. He's actually a conservation biologist. He's also a geneticist. He's the director of the Bioscience Engineering and Farm Innovations division of the Tropical Institute of Development Innovations. Many thanks for joining us. Also, Leonida Odongo, who is an activist from Kenya, who works with the Haki Nawiri Afrika organization, joined us with this, with her own perspective on this very interesting conversation. And also we had Patience Koku, who is a farmer in Nigeria, who is also the CEO of the Replenish Farms, also joining us for this conversation. It's been a conversation on World Intellectual Property Day, also marking World Seed Day, as is celebrated by a number of the groups. Many thanks for joining us. The conversation will be archived on our Facebook page at Science Ally. You can also find us on YouTube at Science Ally. All the details of that will be present there. On Twitter, we are on the page Science Ally, and also on Instagram, you can find us at Science Ally. My name is Joseph Opoku Gakpo. Many thanks for joining us. Have a blessed day.